I was 4 years old when I first saw the Imperial Palace. My parents dragged me to some fancy banquet, all silk robes, and important people talking about things I didn't understand. The main hall was packed with officials in their dress uniforms, music floating everywhere, and honestly, I was bored out of my mind. More importantly, I really needed to pee. I called out to my parents a few times, but they were too busy schmoozing with some general or another. Nobody heard me. So I did what any desperate 4-year-old would do. I went looking for the bathroom myself. The palace was massive. Golden pillars, fancy tile work, everything gleaming under the lantern light. I got completely lost. Turned down about 5 wrong hallways before I finally found what looked like a restroom. That's where I saw him. A little boy in a bright yellow silk robe, embroidered with gold thread, standing at the urinal. He looked about my age, maybe a year older, and he was standing up to pee, which made sense, but also he had something I didn't. "Why are you standing like that?" I asked, walking right up to him like I owned the place. He jumped about 3 feet in the air and yanked his pants up so fast I thought he'd hurt himself. His face got all serious and pouty, like I just ruined his entire day. I felt bad. I gave him my best apologetic smile, the one that usually got me out of trouble. "Why, do you have something I don't?" I asked, tilting my head. He stared at me like I'd asked him to explain the meaning of life. "Have you seen the Imperial physician?" he asked carefully. I shook my head. My little hair buns wobbled with the movement. "No, just the local doctor." And then, I don't know why, my eyes got all watery. Maybe it was the unfairness of it all. Maybe I was just tired. But suddenly I was crying, and this kid I just met was panicking. He started wiping my tears with his little hands, trying to fix my crooked hair buns, looking absolutely lost. But I kept crying harder. "I want one too," I sobbed. He stood there for a second, thinking. Then his face lit up like he just solved the world's greatest problem. "I'll find scissors," he announced, grabbing my hand. "I'll cut mine in half and give you some." Through my tears, I nodded. This kid was the most generous person I'd ever met. "When I grow up, I'll give it back to you," I promised. He carefully straightened my hair buns again. "Okay, just stop crying, all right?" A palace maid brought scissors almost immediately. He was reaching for them when everything went wrong. Suddenly, there were palace servants everywhere, all of them dropping to their knees. I still didn't understand what was happening. Not until my parents came running. My father, who spent his days writing official documents, apparently had a hidden talent for wielding a bamboo rod. My mother, always so proper and dignified, turned out to be just as creative with her punishments. I almost didn't make it to age 5. If it wasn't for this kid stepping in and taking all the blame, I probably wouldn't be here telling this story. Later, I found out he was the crown prince. He'd almost become a 9,000-year-old corpse because of me. After that incident, my parents were terrified. They stopped taking me to palace events entirely. One imperial decree later, and my entire family's names were basically on death row. The Imperial Palace never sent an execution order. Unfortunately, that turned out to be worse. 3 days after the banquet, an imperial eunuch arrived at our front gate carrying 6 boxes of gifts. My father nearly died. Not metaphorically. Actually died. The man was halfway through announcing, "By order of His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince," before father rolled his eyes back and collapsed face first into the courtyard. The eunuch screamed. My mother screamed. The servants screamed. I thought everyone was playing a game, and started screaming too. By sunset, 3 physicians were treating father while mother knelt before the family shrine muttering prayers under her breath. Nobody touched the gift boxes. Not one person. They sat in the middle of the courtyard like 6 beautifully wrapped death sentences. Finally, mother pointed at the oldest servant. "Open them." The servant immediately started crying. "Madam, I've served this family for 30 years. "Exactly. Then why are you trying to kill me?" Eventually, father recovered enough to inspect them personally. Inside were toys, wooden animals, silk dolls, tiny lacquered puzzle boxes, and enough candied fruit to supply an army. There was also a note, written in large, crooked characters. "For the crying girl." Father stared at the note. Then he looked at me, then back at the note. His expression became haunted. He remembers. Mother fainted. Again. Meanwhile, inside the Eastern Palace, the Crown Prince was receiving his own lecture. The Emperor sat behind his desk rubbing his temples. Across from him, the 5-year-old Crown Prince stood stubbornly, with his arms folded. You cannot simply give away part of your body. Why not? Because that's not how bodies work. The prince frowned, but she was sad. People are sad about many things. Then I'll help them. The emperor suddenly understood why every tutor assigned to his son developed headaches. Not like that. The prince thought for a moment. What if I give her half my desserts instead? The emperor nearly cried with relief. Yes. Okay. The crisis appeared resolved. It was not. The next day the prince sent 17 desserts to my house. That became a problem, because he never stopped. Every few weeks something would arrive.
A toy, a book,
a box of sweets, a carved jade rabbit, a silk pouch, a flower he'd picked himself. My parents aged visibly. Father developed white hair. Mother started burning incense every morning. Neither knew how to reject gifts from the future emperor. Neither knew why the future emperor kept sending them. As for me, I thought I had made a friend. When I was 6, I received a tiny wooden horse. When I was 7, a collection of storybooks. When I was 8, an embroidered handkerchief. When I was 9, a pearl hairpin. That was when my father finally snapped. He marched directly to the palace gates demanding an audience. The guards refused. Father insisted. The guards refused harder. Father spent 6 hours outside before returning home, looking like a defeated scholar who had lost an argument with the heavens. Mother asked what happened. Father sank into a chair. The crown prince said he was investing. Mother blinked. In what? Father stared into the distance. Apparently our daughter. The situation became even stranger after the prince turned 10, because that was the age he discovered palace archives. One afternoon, he learned that emperors had empresses. The realization hit him like lightning. He immediately summoned his tutor. Can an emperor choose his empress? The tutor nodded. Usually.
Good.
The tutor felt a sudden sense of dread. Your Highness, why are you smiling like that? The prince ignored him. In his mind, the matter was already settled. After all, he had made a promise. And so had she. The crying girl with crooked hair buns would obviously become his empress. The logic was flawless. At least according to him. While this was happening, I remained blissfully unaware. At 10 years old, my greatest concern was climbing trees. At 11, it was winning arguments against my cousins. At 12, it was stealing pastries from the kitchen. The crown prince never entered my thoughts. Not once. Meanwhile, the entire Eastern Palace knew my name. The prince's attendants knew my favorite snacks. My birthday. My handwriting. The books I liked. The flowers growing in our courtyard. The captain of the prince's guards once asked why. The prince looked genuinely confused. How else am I supposed to prepare? For what? My future wife. The captain walked away and requested stronger tea. Then came the year I turned 13. The year everything changed. The year my father opened an imperial decree and fainted so hard he knocked over an entire bookshelf. And for the first time in 9 years, I learned that the little boy with the scissors had never forgotten me. Not even once. The imperial decree lay on the floor. My father lay beside it. Neither appeared capable of getting up anytime soon. Mother was fanning father frantically while simultaneously trying not to faint herself. The imperial messenger had developed the expression of a man who regretted every life choice that had led him to this courtyard. As for me, I was still staring at the decree. Engagement. The words didn't change no matter how many times I reread them. Engagement to the crown prince. The future emperor. The little boy who had once attempted to solve my anatomical crisis with scissors. I suddenly felt very tired. The next week passed in a blur. Imperial tailors arrived. Jewelry craftsmen arrived. Etiquette instructors arrived. More servants appeared than our household had seen in the previous decade combined. Our peaceful residence transformed into a battlefield. Except instead of soldiers, it was elderly women determined to turn me into a proper future crown princess. Unfortunately, I was not cooperating. Lady Shun, walk slower. I walked faster. Lady Shun, sit properly. I slouched. Lady Shun, a crown princess does not eat like that. I stuffed another dumpling into my mouth. The instructors aged rapidly. By the third day, one of them openly cried. Meanwhile, inside the Eastern Palace, the crown prince was having the opposite experience. Your Highness, the engagement decree has been delivered. The prince nodded. His attendant blinked. That was it? 10 years of waiting. And that was his reaction? Your Highness doesn't seem excited. The prince calmly turned a page in his book. I've known she would marry me since I was 4. The attendant wanted to argue. Unfortunately, he had heard the story before. Many times. Far too many times. The entire Eastern Palace had heard the story. The guards had heard it. The cooks had heard it. Even the palace dogs had probably heard it. Nobody could escape the tale of the crying girl and the scissors. A few weeks later, I was summoned to the palace. Again. My parents looked as though they were accompanying me to my execution. Father squeezed my shoulders before I entered. If anything happens, remember that your mother and I love you. Father, I'm meeting my fiancé. Exactly. That did not inspire confidence. The crown prince received me in a lakeside pavilion. The moment I arrived, I knew something was wrong. There were paintings everywhere.
Dozens of them.
Maybe hundreds. I looked closer, then froze. Every painting was of me. Age 5. Age 6. Age 7. Age 8. Different hairstyles. Different dresses. Different seasons. My soul quietly left my body. Why are there so many? The prince glanced around.
Oh.
That was his response? I pointed at a painting. That's me climbing a tree. Yes. How did you know I climbed that tree? I had someone report it. I pointed at another. That's me stealing mooncakes. 8 mooncakes. It was 7. It was 8. I stared. He stared back. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang. I considered jumping into the lake. You're strange. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The pavilion became silent. The attendants collectively stopped breathing. One maid dropped a tray. A guard looked ready to write his will. Nobody called the crown prince strange. Nobody. The future emperor simply blinked, then smiled. I know. The attendants looked shocked. Apparently, they had never heard that answer before. Neither had I. For the next hour, he showed me around the garden. To my surprise, conversation came easily. Partly because he'd somehow collected enough information about me to write a detailed biography. Partly because he remembered absolutely everything. At age 6, you hated carrots. I stared. I still hate carrots. I know. You know? I had the kitchen stop serving them today. You also prefer lotus pastries over red bean pastries. And you're afraid of geese. I stopped walking. His smile widened. You remember the geese? They chased me. You hit one with a shoe. It started it. For a second, the crown prince laughed so hard he had to lean against a tree. I found myself smiling too. Then I immediately stopped.
No.
Dangerous. This was how palace drama started. The real disaster occurred 3 months later, because that was when I met the emperor. Officially, the ruler of the empire sat on his throne studying me. I did my best not to shake. After a long silence, he sighed. You're exactly as described. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment. Then the emperor glanced at his son. Do you know how many years I've listened to stories about you? My eyes widened. The crown prince suddenly looked away. The emperor laughed. Actually laughed. Every birthday. The prince remained silent. Every festival. Silence. Every single year. The emperor turned back to me. When he was 5, he announced you would become his wife. I wanted to disappear. When he was 7, he informed the court astrologer.
Please let me die.
When he was 10, he began planning your wedding. I was no longer alive. My spirit had ascended. The emperor seemed delighted by my suffering. I considered stopping him. My hope returned. Then the emperor continued. but it was the first time he'd ever been interested in anyone. My hope died. Again. He even refused marriage alliances from powerful noble families. The emperor shook his head. Do you know what reason he gave? I didn't want to know. Unfortunately, the emperor told me anyway. He said he was already spoken for. The crown prince looked entirely unashamed. The emperor laughed until tears formed in his eyes. That night, as I left the palace, one question refused to leave my mind. When I was 4 years old, I'd forgotten him within weeks. A few vague memories. Nothing more. Yet somehow, for 10 entire years, the crown prince had remembered every word I'd ever said. Every promise. Every tear. Every crooked hair bun. And for the first time, instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt something warm in my chest. Something dangerous. Because if a person could remember another for 10 years, maybe that wasn't obsession anymore. Maybe it was something else entirely. And that realization frightened me far more than any imperial decree ever had. For the next few weeks, I avoided the crown prince. Not openly, of course. One does not openly avoid the future emperor. One simply becomes difficult to find. If he invited me to a tea pavilion, I was suddenly learning embroidery. If he suggested a stroll through the gardens, I was studying court etiquette. If he requested lunch together, I had developed an extremely urgent need to visit my mother. Unfortunately, the crown prince was the sort of man who could command an entire empire. Locating one troublesome fiancé was hardly a challenge. Lady Shen has gone to the Western Gardens. Then prepare the Western Gardens. Lady Shen is visiting the library. Good. I need a book. Lady Shen left through the south gate. Excellent.
So did I.
The attendants stopped warning him after a while. There wasn't much point. 3 days later, he cornered me beside a koi pond. I nearly dropped the basket of pastries I was carrying. Your Highness. You've been avoiding me. Straight to the point. How annoying. I would never. You absolutely would. You climbed over a wall yesterday. The traitorous wall had apparently reported my activities. I glared at him. He looked pleased. Why are you hiding? His voice wasn't angry, just curious, which somehow made things worse. I stared at the koi swimming beneath the water. Orange.
White.
Peaceful. Unlike my thoughts. Because the truth was embarrassingly simple. For years, the crown prince had been a funny story, an absurd childhood memory, a distant figure. Now he was becoming a real person. And the more real he became, the more dangerous he felt. Not because he might hurt me, but because I was beginning to like him. That was considerably more terrifying. I don't know. It wasn't a complete lie. The crown prince studied me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he reached into his sleeve. What is that? A gift.
No.
His hand froze.
No.
No more gifts. The man looked genuinely wounded. You don't like gifts? I do. Then. You've been sending them for almost 10 years. His expression turned thoughtful. That's true. Normal people don't do that. You're assuming I'm normal. I hated how reasonable that answer sounded. He finally handed me the object. A small wooden rabbit. Simple.
Smooth.
Clearly carved by hand. I turned it over. The craftsmanship wasn't perfect. There were tiny flaws near the ears. Did you make this? The crown prince looked away. That alone was answer enough. I blinked.
Twice.
The future emperor had spent his free time carving rabbits.
For me.
My heart performed something alarming inside my chest. Your Highness. You're really strange. His lips twitched. I know. This time, when he smiled, I found myself smiling back. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it marked the beginning of a disaster. Because word spread. The palace was a machine built entirely out of gossip. Nothing remained secret for long. Within days, everyone knew the crown prince had personally carved a gift for his fiancée. Within a week, people were discussing it at banquets. Within 2 weeks, noble daughters throughout the capital wanted me dead. Not literally.
Probably.
Hopefully. The first incident occurred during a spring banquet. A noble lady accidentally spilled tea on my dress. A second accidentally stepped on my skirt. A third accidentally knocked over my chair. By the fourth accident, even I noticed the pattern. The Crown Prince noticed too. Mostly because he happened to walk into the garden just as one particularly ambitious young woman attempted to push me into a pond. Unfortunately for her, she succeeded. Partially. She pushed. I slipped and instinctively grabbed her sleeve. So we both went in. The splash echoed across the entire garden. Cold water swallowed me whole. I surfaced coughing. The noble lady surfaced screaming. The Crown Prince stood on the shore staring at us. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then, to everyone's horror, His Highness started laughing. Not polite laughter. Not restrained amusement. Actual laughter. The kind that doubled a person over. The noble lady looked devastated. I looked murderous. The Crown Prince looked delighted. Later that evening, while servants dried my hair, news arrived. The noble lady's family had been reprimanded. Harshly. Not because she'd targeted me, but because she'd embarrassed herself. Apparently, according to the Crown Prince. If you're going to challenge my fiancé, at least win. The story spread throughout the capital. After that, the assassination attempts disguised as accidents became noticeably less frequent. Months passed, then years. Slowly, imperceptibly, the engagement stopped feeling temporary. Stopped feeling arranged. Stopped feeling like a promise made by two children. The Crown Prince became my closest friend. The first person I wanted to tell when something funny happened. The first person I looked for at banquets. The first person who could make me laugh after a terrible day. And somehow, without noticing when it happened, I fell in love. I realized it during a thunderstorm. Not a dramatic realization. No sudden lightning strike. No poetic revelation. I was simply sitting beside him in a pavilion while rain hammered against the roof. He was reviewing state documents. I was pretending to read. Mostly I was watching him. The concentration in his eyes. The slight crease between his brows. The way he always pushed his sleeves up when working. Small things. Ordinary things. The sort of details people only notice when they care too much. And suddenly, I knew. The realization should have been joyful. Instead, it made me panic. Because loving a future emperor was dangerous. History books were full of empresses who ended badly. Palace politics. Power struggles. Betrayal. None of it cared about love. For the first time since our engagement, I was afraid. Not for myself. For us. That fear grew stronger the day the emperor fell ill. The illness wasn't fatal. At first. But everyone understood what it meant. The old emperor was aging. The Crown Prince would inherit sooner rather than later. And with inheritance came enemies. Lots of them. People who smiled in public and sharpened knives in private. People who would happily use me against him. One evening I found him alone in the palace gardens. Moonlight painted silver across the lake. For once, he wasn't smiling. For once, he looked tired. Very tired. The weight of an empire already resting on his shoulders. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he asked quietly, "Are you afraid?" I knew what he meant. The future. The throne. Everything waiting ahead. So I answered honestly, "Yes." He nodded. "So am I." The confession surprised me. The Crown Prince always seemed so certain. So unshakable. Yet here he was. Just a young man. Not an emperor. Not a legend. Just someone carrying responsibilities too large for any one person. Without thinking, I reached for his hand. His fingers immediately tightened around mine. As though he'd been waiting years for permission. Maybe he had. The moon reflected in the water. The gardens were silent. And suddenly I remembered two children standing in a palace restroom. One crying. One desperately searching for scissors. Neither understanding anything about the future. Neither knowing where life would lead. Yet somehow, against all logic, they had arrived here. Together. And for now it feels like I found myself hoping things will stay like this.